Kuzu Consult is a blockchain consultancy firm based in Nigeria. This is a contribution from Kuzu Consult to the Algorand ecosystem. In this presentation, we will learn how to develop decentralized applications in the form of web application using the C#.NET framework to communicate with the Algorand blockchain to create account addresses and mnemonic keys which will be stored into our database. In this application architecture, we believe every application must have an architecture, but plenty of applications have been created with architectures that were not well considered. As a developer, you should design your solutions architecture to fulfill application requirements and create a robust and high-performing application. For this presentation, our architecture or our design pattern for a web application is going to be through the use of the MVC. MVC stands for Model, Views, and Controller. We're going to look at what they all mean. For model, the model is a part of the application that handles the business logic. It is the representation of data. Controllers handle incoming requests, handles user input and interaction, and executes application logic. The view is responsible for displaying data. Obviously, our views are our web pages that displays or show our result on our application or on our web browsers. So right here I have Visual Studio 2019 opened, and we're going to create a web application for our presentation. So let's go ahead and create a new project. So we're going to have generated project templates we can use. This will make our development faster, easier and better. So let's go ahead and select the ASP.NET Core web application, or if you cannot see it here, you can just head over to the search and then search for ASP.NET Core. Alright, so we have our ASP.NET Core web application template. The project template for creating ASP.NET Core web apps and web APIs for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS using the .NET Core or .NET framework. You can create web applications with result pages, MVC, or single page applications using Angular, React, or React and Redux. So let's go ahead and select this template. You can see it's a C# based framework. It works on Linux, Mac OS, Windows. You can use it for the cloud or services on our web. Let's go ahead and create. Click on next, and then I'll call this Algorand web application demo. Go ahead and create after renaming it. Alright, so we have quite a lot of options here. There are different versions of the .NET. We're going to use the 3.1 version, and then our MVC web application. So we're going to select an authentication method with individual user accounts. This will actually help our development faster. So we do not have to necessarily create a database. This will be automatically generated for us once we have this after running our migrations. So it's going to come with an authentication, a login, a logout, or sign in and sign out. So for this to happen, we must have an already made database set up for us. So we're going to take advantage of this and then create our application with it. Let's go ahead and select the MVC, change this to individual user accounts, and then go ahead and create. So our project is creating at the moment. This will take a little bit of time. Then depending on how fast your device is, this will also determine how fast your project will create. It is advisable to have a PC, personal computer, or whichever device you're using to have a minimum requirement of about 4 GB RAM for your Visual Studio to run efficiently. So our project is still creating. Let's wait for it. So as you can see, our application has started and ready to build on it. So as we earlier explained, we're going to have our MVC design pattern. We have the controllers, we have the models, and we have the views. So remember, I said a model is a representation of data. The controllers handle the requests, and then the views displays our results or data. Okay, so look at the controller as a middleman between the model and the view. The controller handles whatever request, whatever we're trying to pass in back into our back end where the logic is, which will then be forwarded into our views where we'll see the result on our web pages. So after creating this project, all the necessary tools will be first restored into our application before we can actually run it efficiently. So take a look at, I'm going to use a blog as an example. Take a look at a blog, for example. A blog is going to have a title, it may be a short description, and then the actual explanation or the description of what the blog contains, the date, time, or the date it was published, and then probably the author. So all these things are from our model. You know, we're going to have a title, we're going to have a description, we're going to have the date it was published, we're going to have the author. So that's just a typical example of how the model works. So let's head over into our models file, our models folder, and create a new class. Remember, we're using the C# language. This is very object oriented. Everything is classes. Everything here is classes, classes, classes. So let's go ahead and create a new class and then call this account address model. Alright, so we have our account address model up and running. So let's go ahead and create a model. So I'm going to make our ID a key. I'm going to explain that in a short while. So you can see how IntelliSense is actually picking up errors, which will then give us suggestions on how to fix it. So this is the using statement we need to avoid or prevent the error. So we just added this using system.componentModel.data annotations. We're going to have a string, which will then be my account address. So like I said, we're going to have an ID. This ID is actually going to represent whichever account address and mnemonic we have. So we're going to use the ID as a representation of what our model is, or how to locate our model. Where can we find our model? We're going to locate our model or the data via the ID. So if you can get the ID of a particular account address or mnemonic key, you can fetch the data. So I'm making this a key so that we will not have more than one ID that is the same. For example, if you create an account address with an ID that is 1, if we try to create another one, it should not be 1, it must not be 1, it cannot be 1, because of this key statement over here. Let's hover over it and see what it entails. So we can see a short description denotes one or more properties that uniquely identify an entity. So we can identify whichever address or mnemonic key via the ID that is unique. So the ID is a unique address. So now that we have our models, let's go ahead and then create a controller. Add a new controller. I'm going to select the third option over here, MVC controller with views using entity framework. This is going to create a simple CRUD application that we can use to create our account address and our mnemonic key. So we have our model class option here. It's asking us to select a model class. And our model class is account address model, which you have over here. I'm going to select it, and then our data context. Remember, I created one with authentication in an individual user authentication. This already has a database in place for us from our DB context, so we do not necessarily have to create a whole database setup to save time. So let's go ahead and create. This will install the necessary things needed to create our controller class for us. So it's installing NuGet packages. This may take a few moments. As you can see, it's currently installing our SQLite, our Microsoft Entity Framework. Alright, so we have our account address models controller up and running. As you can see here, I'm going to explain every single thing from top to bottom. So these are all the using statements we need to get our controller up and running. We have our namespace and then our class. That's our controller class. As you can see, our controller class is inheriting from controller. We have a private read-only field from our application DB context. This is where our database, all the context of our database is being stored. We have a constructor passing in the field or context over here into our constructor, which will then, this will make our database accessible from our controller. So we have an index page over here, public assign task. This is asynchronous, it works asynchronous. and then we have a return view statement. Because of our async statement, we have an await over here. We will not go deep into that. So like I said, our context actually now has, our controller now has access to our database because of what was done here, this lines of code over here. So we can then call our context.account address model dot to list async. Alright, so this is going to return all the account addresses into our index page, all our account addresses and the mnemonic keys together, because they are inside of our class over here. You can see the account address and our mnemonic key. So that is what we're actually calling from our database, because it has been stored inside of our DB, our database. Alright, we have a details page over here with an int ID. Alright, I have a question mark, meaning it can be nullable, it can be empty. So okay, so just the same way we have our public assign task over here, we have the same thing, just that this is having a parameter attached to it. That means, okay, if we are looking for details of a particular thing, okay, just imagine a blog, for example. You see a list of blog news, you want to click on it and read. Imagine this details page as that page that when you click on, it will take you to the full blog page where you'll be able to read the details of the blog. So we have an if statement. If the ID of that page is null, it should return a not found page or a not found error for us. And then we have a variable var account address model awaiting, fetching from our database. That's our context account address model dot first or default. So it's going to get either the first or the default item or list it finds from our ID. So if this account address model is actually null, then return a not found error, else is going to return the view of our account address model. So we have our create. Okay, this is going to get a little bit complicated a little bit. So we have our create. This is a get, http get, and then this is our http post. So this just returns our view, and this is where the actual functionality happens. Remember, I talked about controllers handling requests. Alright, so this is an example of one. Okay, so we have our http post, and then the same public assign task, action results, create. So we're binding all the necessary things or the necessary fields that are inside of our account address model inside of this place here for security reasons. Because if we have an ID, if for example I have an ID here and I remove ID or account address or any of these keys from my create page, and we try to create something without any of this, it will not work. Alright, so that's why we're binding it into our class or method, sorry. So we also have our account address model. This is making an instance. This is also the same thing as making an instance of our account address model. So this particular account address model has access to what is inside of this account address model. That's the actual class itself. So we can access anything that's inside this account address model from here, just the way we did with the context for our database. This context actually has access to everything inside of our database context. The same way it works for this also. So we have an if statement saying if our model state is valid. This means if the form that we're trying to fill or input our details into, if it's valid, then this functions or this particular functions will be performed. So from our database context.add is going to add everything that is inside of our account address model. That is the ID, the account address, and then the mnemonic key. After doing that, it's going to save our changes from our database and then redirect us back to our index page. Our index page which will then display all the available records inside of our database. The edit also similarly to the details page. We are going to find what we want to edit first before editing it. Nothing too complex about it. The same process, find by ID, find it synchronously, and then if it's not found, it's going to, if it's null, it's going to return a not found error, else, and then return our account address model. That's the HTTP get. Now into our HTTP post for edit, this is where the actual, similar to how our create is, we also have a binding and then our edit ID. So this is going to find what we want to edit, and then after finding it, if our model state is valid, that's after editing what we want to edit, once we click on the save button or update, it's going to update it using this statement and then save our changes to our database. We have a try and catch. In case we have any error, it's going to catch the error and then throw an exception back for us. For delete, the same thing. Similarly, we are going to definitely find what we want to delete. After finding what we want to delete, if we don't find it, it's going to return null. So after finding it, we're going to use this actually to find our ID, the ID of what we want to edit, of what we want to delete rather. So this is the HTTP post. So after finding it, all right, so we have our find assign key of the ID. It's going to remove it and then save our changes and then return, take us back to our index page. This is what this redirect to action means. It's going to redirect us back to the name of index as our index page that displays our data. And then we have a private boolean account address model exists. This will actually check if our model exists before we can edit or do any other thing. So this is the single line of code that is responsible for that. Of course, if we are going to make a much bigger complex application, this is just for a sample or demo purpose we're doing this. We would not really do it this way, creating our model. Of course, we have so much lines of code over here which we can refactor using probably dependency injection or services, and then make this, we could actually compress this down to maybe 40 lines of code from 154 if we do it appropriately. This is actually appropriate for just this demo purpose. We're using it this way. So let's go ahead and go into our views. Remember, this is our controller. Let me minimize it. Let me minimize the model and open the views. So we have our account address models. That's the view for our account address model. We have the create, delete, details, edit, and index, just the way it is from our controller. So let's go ahead and open the index page. So you can see it's fetching our data from, is an enumerable. That means it's going to return a list of the data we have in our database stored. Maybe this is the HTML code snippet. Right, so we can right click on anywhere and then go to controller to take you to the index controller. From the index controller, you can click anywhere inside of the method and then right click and then go to view to take you back to the view where you were. So an easy navigation. So having done this, let's go into our package manager console and then run a migration. I'm not really sure if migration is needed. Because we can actually run it like this and then we can run our migration from our browser after the application starts. Well, anyways, let's go ahead and run a migration. I'll call this initial migration. This will scaffold our database model or database class into our database. After doing that, we're going to save the changes. Just the way we saw from our controller. If you add something, you save changes. If you delete something, you save changes. If you edit, you save changes. Similarly, we're adding a migration. We're going to update our database. So let me go ahead and actually increase this just see a more detailed explanation or write-up of what's there. So to undo this action, if you want to undo what we did, we can just use this remove migration statement. But then we're going to proceed and update our database. Alright, our build started, our build was successful. Alright, so I'm still waiting for it to update the database. It should run now in a short while. Alright, so it's done. Let's go ahead and minimize it back. Okay, so everything was created successfully. Alright, so we can go ahead and debug and then start our project. You can either start it with debugging or start it without debugging. Normally, if you're starting with debugging, is if you want to debug something or you want to set breakpoints and see actual data being passed. Right, let's go ahead and actually run it with debugging to see how everything works. Alright, so I'm going to set breakpoints. Alright, everything here. Yeah, I'm just set it everywhere. Right, the whole the whole method. Alright, so we can go ahead and start debugging as we're starting the project with debugging. So whenever we hit this create button or we enter the create, whenever we input our data and then hit on the create button, it should bring us back to this particular page here to see what is being added. So remember, our MVC, we have our controller and our views, right? And then inside of our views, we have a folder containing our create, update, index, and details page, all those pages that we saw from our controller. So we're going to actually, because we haven't passed in or included the link to this account address model controller, we have to then type it directly on our web browser when it runs, or we can just simply add it and then run the project again from scratch. Not really from scratch, the whole project, but debugging it, starting the project, we have to do it again. So we can just search for it, or search for this particular accounts, this particular controller and the views attached to it. So our web browser should come up in a short while. Alright, so our web browser is up and running. Okay, so our local host is up. So to locate where our pages are, let's head over to our Solution Explorer, and then all we need to do is to type account address models/index on our web browser to find our index page. So let's navigate through other things. Our layout page is actually the page where our header and footer is. So this is where the links at the header and the links at the footer are located. So we could just simply add a list, a new unordered, it's an unordered list, a new unordered list, and then simply add the controller name and then the name of the page. That's ASP action, that's the name of the page. The ASP controller is the controller name. This will then take us there directly from the link. We could just click on the link. If had it been we added it, but because we haven't added it, we have to manually type it, the controller name and then the page name. So let's head back to our browser. Alright, so it's up and running. I'm going to add the account address model. /index. Hopefully I got it correctly. So we can actually see how development with .NET is quite easy to get started with. Nothing too complex about this in particular. Right, so let me go back and make sure I got the navigation correctly. Account address models /index. Okay, so we're having a little bit of delay in the page loading because of our database connection. Let's refresh and then log it in again. So it's actually supposed to be this fast. Yeah, because I was wondering why it was so slow. Right, so our account address. All right, so right here we cannot really use this particular field information because we're trying to generate or create account addresses. We can't just type in what our account address would be. So that won't work correctly. So for demo 6, let me just type in anything, just anything. All right, and then create. So when I hit the create button, it's going to take us, we can see our Visual Studio is highlighting over. It's going to take us back in here, and then okay, let's see what we've done so far, because we just hit the create button. So and we've set our breakpoints on the create, so it's telling us, hey, something is happening here. All right, so let's hover over this guy. our context and then hit the drop down and see the details of what is being passed in. Alright, so these are all the things we have inside of our database that we're taking a look at. Yeah, these are all the options we can see. Alright, so that's how to set a breakpoint. So we can see our account address, what we typed in as our account address. You can see the ID and then we can see the mnemonic key. That is all what we typed in inside of here, inside of the form. So let's go ahead and click on continue. So this will then complete it. Alright, so I just ran it with debugging to show us how to actually debug or see if we're trying to pass in or enter data into a particular form of field, and we want to know if the data was actually passed in. So that's how to set breakpoints and test it out. So after this, we are going to run it normally. Alright, continue. Okay, so I think I have to click on continue for every single time I run it. Alright, so yeah, it was created successfully. Now let's create. We do not want to create this all the time. It won't be right to actually type in an account address or a mnemonic key. Let's generate it directly from Algorand itself, from the Algorand blockchain. So let me go ahead and close this or stop the debugging, stop the whole process. So the next thing we're going to do here, we're going to create or install our Algorand. We haven't done that, remember, so we're going to do that now. Let's right click on the project name. Right, so these are all the packages or references that we have inside of our project. So let's go ahead and to manage NuGet packages. This will use the NuGet package to install the Algorand. Alright, so let's go ahead and search for Algorand. We can see it here, then see all the available other details. It was this stable version 0.2.0 was actually deployed on the 11th of November. That was like 5 days ago. So let's go ahead and install it. That's the latest version. Let's click on OK and accept. Alright, so I think our package has installed successfully. Alright, it has installed successfully. Alright, we have it installed over here. We have the green icon, so we can auto hide this and close it. Let's see. So now we can see our Algorand inside of our package, our package reference version 0.2.0. Can go ahead and close this, and let's go back to our controller right here. So when creating remember I said our accounts, this particular account address, this account address model has access to everything that is inside our account address model. So this is an instance of this class. So we can do this account address model dot account address. So remember I said we can actually access everything that is inside it using this guy. So we have that. So let's go ahead and import our Algorand. So let me just quickly, now before I do that, let me create an instance of an account, with the Algorand. So okay, equals new. So this is another way of instantiating. All right, so this particular account can have access to everything that is inside this account. Likewise, this account address having access to everything that is inside this account address model. All right, so let's go ahead and import our package, our Algorand package, into our controller. Yep, using Algorand. So let's go over to our header, and we can see it has successfully added. So this is actually making development very easy, fast, and better, more convenient. Okay, so account.address to string. All right, so we can do the same thing for mnemonic key. Accounts, not this, account address model dot mnemonic key. All right, equals accounts dot to mnemonic. Yep, is all we need. All right, so remember all these things we're calling address dot to string, they're all built-in functions or methods. And if you're calling a method, remember this controller, this class, or this is a method itself, and if you're going to create a method, you must have this open and close bracket to identify it as a method. That's why we also have our open and close brackets right here. Okay, so this is supposed to be to mnemonic, not to string, sorry about that. So mnemonic, this one right here. All right, so having done this, if we create another account address, or if we generate another one, our account address should be generated automatically from our Algorand blockchain connected to our application. Our mnemonic key should also be generated automatically from the Algorand blockchain. So let's go into our create page. Let's go to the view, and then we do not need these input fields because we want it to be generated automatically from the controller class, from the back end. So yes, and then let me also include the link from our layout. So I'll copy this existing one and then duplicate it and edit. All right, so I'm going to change this to our view name, our controller class name, that's account address models, and then I'll call this generate accounts address. So this will appear in our header. Of course, we only change the account address model because we have the index inside here, so we just need to call or change it to the controller name. So let's go ahead and run it this time around without debugging. Okay, so our project is trying to build, and then before running, so everything has been built successfully. So it actually built, that's why it took time. It did not just run, it's going to build and then run the application for us. So we have 1 successful, 0 failed, 0 up to date, 0 skipped. So our application or web browser should come up right now. Alright, so our browser is up and running. So just .NET is a free cross-platform open source developer platform for building many different types of applications. You can build web applications, you can build mobile applications, Internet of Things, cloud services. You can build anything, desktop applications, anything you want to develop, anything you want to build. .NET is available for you. You can use different languages for it. You can use C#, you can use F#. Alright, so let's go ahead and click on our generate account address link. Alright, so okay, let's speed, it's fast. Alright, so let's create a new account address, and then of course I commented out the fields that we're supposed to input, so we can just generate it directly from our back end. So go ahead and click on create. So we should have an account address and the mnemonic key attached to it. Alright, so if we're to actually have an account address, this is what an account address would look like, not this. This is just some random typing I did. And then we have a mnemonic key. Just imagine this as a password or a sequence of codes or characters or text that you need to input to have access to your account. So we can go ahead and delete this. Delete. Alright, so we're left with just this. So the next step, we're going to actually check if this account address is valid or not. We're going to know if it just generated some random characters, we don't know. So we're going to write a Python code or one of our previous Python codes from our previous tutorials to check if this account address is valid or not. Alright, so this is a Python code. Remember, with Python, with Algorand smart contract, which is still, we can use several SDKs like we just did with C#. So for this one, we're going to use PyTil actually through the use of Python. So we have to import the Algo SDK and then have it in your project to test. So let's go ahead and grab our account address over here to check if it's valid or not. So I'm going to replace this with the one that was generated for us. Alright, so let's go ahead and right click and run Python file in terminal. So if our account address is valid, it's going to display this, the address is valid. If it is not valid, it's going to display this, the address is not valid. So like I earlier said, with .NET you can use multiple languages, editors and libraries to build for web, mobile, desktop, games, Internet of Things. Alright, so it's that flexible. In our previous presentations we made some code demos of how to develop desktop applications to do this same thing, and mobile application that can work on both Android and iOS devices to also generate account addresses. So you can look it up on YouTube, I guess. Right, so I'm still waiting for it to build and then throw us back the results on our terminal. So hopefully it should work in a short while. Alright, okay, let's click on it. Okay, so I think our Visual Studio Code just closed by itself, or it's trying to restart. I think I have Visual Studio itself is very heavy, and then Visual Studio Code also. Visual Studio Code is a lighter text editor. Alright, so I think maybe we should try opening it again. Alright, so not to waste so much time, you can actually use the code snippet you saw and then test it out if you are following along to check if the account address is valid or not. So I'm trying to open it up again. Hopefully it will work faster this time around without any delay. I'm wondering why it closed by itself. Okay, so Visual Studio is actually updating as well. Anyways, you can use the code snippet you saw to actually test it out if it's valid or not. You can try changing the value of the account address inside the address field for the variable. You can edit it. It should show you if it's valid or not. So if you have the right address like this, it will display that it is valid. Thank you for watching this presentation. Remember, like I earlier said, Kuzu Consult is a blockchain consultancy firm in Nigeria. This is a contribution from Kuzu Consult to the Algorand blockchain ecosystem. So if you have any questions or you want to contact Kuzu Consult, the email address it's down here below, kuzukonsult@gmail.com. Thank you.